everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leader Show. I'm your host today, Adrian Evans, and absolutely thrilled to delighted to welcome our guest, Lisa Akerson. Lisa, good morning.
Good morning, Adrian. Thank you so much for that warm welcome and invitation. I am delighted to be here too.
Excellent, excellent. Well, just to give a bit of context for everybody in the payments industry, obviously communication is fundamentally important, and often in our industry, we could be communicating with the same person today, and they could be a customer. Tomorrow, they could be a partner. And then the following day, we could actually be competitors. So communication and having that mental and emotional dexterity is fundamental to the industry. And it's one of the reasons why I enjoy our industry so much. Now, Lisa, a little bit of a history. Lisa and I have been working together as partners. And also she has coached me a number of times during our relationship over the last 16 years. So I'm really thrilled to share for her to share some of her journey, but also all about effective communication. So, Lisa, without further ado, I wonder if you could tell us how you became your journey and your background and how you became a voice and communications coach.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And yes, really value our friendship and our relationship over many years. So my journey started where I was born, actually, in a bit of context here. I was born in Singapore. And over that time, this is a surprise, I'm sure, to many perhaps of your viewers, thinking I'm a communication skills trainer. But I was very shy as a child, and
Okay.
I was one of five children. And my mother promptly decided to send me off to do speech and drama classes with two Irish nuns. And it was really the formative years for me going on that journey to become more confident in my own speaking and communication skills. And Singapore, as I'm sure many of your viewers know, is a very diverse community. And it has a majority of Chinese population, followed by Malay, Indians, and Europeans, were a small population at the time. And what that taught me as I was growing up, I was obviously encountering so many different ethnic backgrounds, beliefs, religious practices. And not only did I learn to appreciate, but I learned to connect and adapt my communication styles with various groups of people.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. And also, Singapore, as I'm sure many people know, is a very competitive society in terms of it's very driven. And when I was growing up, it was very much an academically driven space, which
Mm-hmm.
means conforming to the culture meant that you had to think and operate in a certain way to get
Yeah,
on.
sure.
And part of that was helping me discover what is my voice?
Mm.
What are my perspectives? How do they differ from perhaps the community and some of the ways of thinking within my society? And that took me on a journey when I was in my late teens. I came over to the UK. I studied here. I got my undergraduate degree. And then I fell into acting and became an actress. Now, at this point, I want to share that the insights here have been huge for me, which I didn't realize when I was going through that journey myself. But what it taught me was stepping into someone else's shoes. When
Okay.
you take on a character, you
Mm.
really have to empathize with that character. You can't judge them. You can't, just decide that they're bad. You've got to be able to empathize and look through their lens so that you are able to see the world in their light. And that, in terms of communication, is key. Because if we're not able to step into someone else's shoes, it just becomes my view or your view. So
Yes.
that gave me that added aspect to my communication toolkit, which then took me on to what I would say is the fundamental part of what I bring to a lot of my clients, which is voice coaching.
Yeah.
So I was one of 12 people at the time invited by the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama to be part of their voice training program. So I felt very privileged. And at that point, apart from learning, the fundamental skills of physiology and voice coaching, one of the things that still sticks with me to today, and I think your viewers will find really helpful to know,
Mm.
is this piece about our anatomy. So I don't know whether you've heard of a bone, Adrian, that's called the hyoid bone.
I haven't
This
known.
is, it's a horseshoe bone and it sits at the top of our larynx. Now, why I'm sharing that with you, it's the only freestanding bone that we have in our body. And what's incredible about this bone is that in a fetus from 5 to 7 weeks old, it's one of the first bones that forms.
Okay.
Now, if you think about our sound, a human sound, this is like your signature note or
Ah,
your
okay.
blueprint. It is no two human beings have the same voice,
Okay.
which is why when we pick the phone up, we know if
Yeah.
it's mum or we know if it's our partners or our children or our boss. And we know that our voices all vary, which tells you something as well, or tells your viewers something as well. So when we talk about being inspired to speak, what are we really talking about? Because if you break that down, the word inspiration comes from the Latin inspiratus, which means to breathe in. And when we breathe in that thought or idea or eureka moment, not only does it fill our entire bodies, but in the act of breathing out, the vocal folds, which is where the larynx and the hyoid bone sits, vibrates. But it doesn't just communicate from your throat. It bounces off the entire bone structure within you. So
Right.
when you actually voice your opinion, your ideas, you're actually communicating through your entire body.
Wow.
And this is so important when we talk about validating another human being's ideas. And we'll come and
Okay.
talk about that a little bit more. But I want to say that's what makes really good speakers, orators, land their message because they're able to move people into action.
Okay. Great.
So that was a very solid part of my journey. And that took me on to realize that actually we are so holistic in our communication. It's not just our ideas and our thoughts, but actually it's how do we think about ourselves as well and how we then utilize that as we
Okay.
work with others. So I
Great.
went and became a master practitioner at NLP, and NLP as an acronym is neuro linguistic programming. And what that means is how we perceive through how our brains are wired up, the world, through our personal filters, and how our language patterns, how we talk to ourselves as much as talk to others, communicate and change behavior.
Yeah.
And the final step is taking all of that and becoming an executive coach, because now I was able to take leaders through their own journeys,
Mm.
their goals, their aspirations, and bring all of this together when they had that interview they had to go for, or
Yeah.
whether they had the pitch, or whether they had to present to a small group in a meeting or a large group on a stage, is how do you then bring your entire body, breath, and voice to communicate effectively to others.
Okay.
So that's been my journey.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your journey, and I love that. So, I'm very curious, and I always I love to learn more about the sort of pieces that brought you to your journey today. So, just thinking about the why is effective communication so important? Because that's what you
Mm,
spend your time helping executives with and helping your clients with.
absolutely. And it's a great question, Adrian. Thank you for asking it. Well, I believe it's an opportunity for us to understand each person's perspective, point of view. It could be their needs, desires, goals.
Mm.
It's an opportunity to build trusting relationships
Okay.
and iron out those differences and misunderstandings that can often occur when we work in any sort of domain. It could be a personal life
Sure.
situation, it could be at work, or it could be out, communicating with others on a pitch somewhere. It really doesn't matter. It's the relationship and the safe space we create that provides this effective communication. And I would add, when we talk about safe space, it's that psychological safe space that enables people to bring their authentic selves.
Mm.
Because when we can bring our authentic self to any communication, first of all, it just means that we are able to bring our honest opinions. We're able to bring our most creative ideas, and we're able to collectively inform decision making. And that certainly must be so productive when we talk about saving time and not going backwards and forwards and checking, have I got the right information? Did I understand you correctly?
Mm.
But it all needs to start, Adrian, I'm sure you agree with this, from the top downwards, that role modeling of good communication skills.
Yeah,
Because if we don't see it at senior leadership
absolutely.
level, it trickles into all sorts of other,
Sure. Yeah,
in some cases, very toxic behaviors
indeed.
and communication that then perpetuates that cycle and that culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's lots of avenues we could go down here, but I'm going to stay really strict and just stay because there's so much we could talk about. So just to say, what is effective communication?
Right. Effective communication is not just the act of speaking. The real crux of effective communication is active listening. And we often forget that actually we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. If we don't fully understand another person's ideas, points of view, or even give them the space to be heard, they first of all won't feel seen, they won't feel validated, and it's so easy to crush people's morals and spirits, or first of all, or not even enable them to feel included.
Okay.
What I find most people doing is they pick the odd word they hear someone and then they run on a tangent with it. And I often find that people will also pick words and perhaps defend their side or their point of view,
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
or quite easily bring it back to their idea, what they want to talk about. So in my years, and I've been 25 years now doing communication skills training, from the public to the private sector, I see the same kinds of patterns, certainly within the Western world, that people get rewarded for being the loudest voice in the
Yes.
room,
Yeah.
for dominating, for interrupting. It's like who shouts the loudest wins.
Yeah.
When actually we know that every voice in that room deserves to be heard.
Mm.
So once again, it's that key piece, isn't it? We talk about the
Mm.
best leaders are the leaders that say, tell me what you think first,
Yeah.
and allow each person to have that voice before even influencing how their team thinks,
Mm.
so that we can then have that collective decision making
Yeah.
or ideas being thrown around the room. So that's my first point is, are you listening to each other? And the second point I want to make is about nonverbal communication, because again, we think it's the content. And actually, the content doesn't come to life fully and completely without the nonverbals. And I'm talking about your body language, and I'm talking about the vocal tonality.
Yeah.
Because anyone, and I'm sure everyone even listening to this, can remember a time when they were thrust into an uncomfortable situation. And that might be public speaking for some people. It might be being asked that challenging question. It might be out in a networking event or any other situation you can conjure up. And we can all remember that moment when you stood there and suddenly there was that, call it
Mm.
facial leakage, where you're suddenly revealing perhaps more than you anticipated or wanted to. Or you might find yourself holding on a sheet of paper and it starts shaking. Or you
Yeah. Yeah.
notice your voice starting to tremble, or your pace going really quickly, or you're finding yourself fidgeting, or you go blank.
Yeah.
All of that are signs of fight or flight responding or response. And that's the nonverbal that's speaking way above any words you could say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that if we see that, it does impact on how people
Mm.
perceive us or how the message lands. So there's a piece of research by Professor Albert Mehrabian, which I know many people probably are familiar with, which says that if your body, voice, and content are not congruent,
All
the
right. Yeah.
audience will go away taking 7% of your information
Yeah.
or your content. So it's worth holding that in mind. But if you go away doing all three, they take away 100%.
Mm. Mm.
So, Adrian, it's a classic thing. If I may give you an example, if I said to you here, I said, Adrian, I'm really excited to be here.
Mm.
You're probably going to hear the words.
No, you're not.
My
You're
guess
lying.
is you're not going to believe me, are you?
Yeah, you're lying. Yeah.
And it's very different to saying, Adrian, I'm excited to be
Yeah.
here, because you can see now how my body and voice connect with my message. So something as simple as that makes a huge difference. And I would say just a quick little thing about Zooms and Teams as well. The same thing applies there. You know, if you decide to switch your camera off, you're not as effective because people can't see you. And certainly if you're multitasking on screen, again, there's going to be an impact on how you're being perceived, but also how people feel you're listening to them.
Excellent, excellent. So Lisa, what I'm hearing so far, just for the audience here, is if you're a leader and people are in the room, well, there's a reason they're in the room. So there's some voices to be heard. But also, I think the key thing is like your ability to listen is as important, if not more important, than what you say. And also then I think the critical thing is the context of actually what are your views? How's your body shaping up? And also what are you saying? Because I think our headline today was you can't not communicate. And particularly with that body language, we're always communicating. Even if we think we're not, we're always communicating. So
Absolutely.
that brings us really quite nicely to what are people missing out then? If you're not communicating effectively, and we will touch on this now, is like in the world, there are, as you've said, and in business and in life and politics, there are many people who dominate, who interrupt, who could be the voice of, but if leaders in our community are not communicating effectively, what are they missing out on, Lisa?
You know, Adrian, I would still come back to that key point. They're missing out on building strong relationships of trust. And we know where that can lead if people don't feel trusted. A society or a culture where there is fear, and where there's fear, you're not going to get the best results out of your workforce.
Yeah.
But also the added thing is if there are misunderstandings or confusions, not only does decisions that are made can go down the wrong path, but there could be errors of judgment, there could be liabilities, there could be lack of productivity. Okay. So many things are the byproduct of that. I often see as well, you know, if we're talking about what happens when people stand up and communicate and they don't, I would say, prepare for that presentation. What happens is often you get this word dump or notes on a PowerPoint where there's too much information. And, you know, the audience are trying to make sense of what is the core message here? What do you want to leave me with that's going to affect the change I need within my world? And then the other side of things are people who equally don't prepare. And so they go off onto a ramble, they waffle, they go off point. And again, they're wasting everyone's time, apart from the fact that we don't understand what it is you want to leave us with.
Okay.
And the third kinds of things that I often see happening is the use of jargon, which is fine if you are working with people who understand your jargon. But when you don't, it's actually a place of alienating people in that group because they don't understand you. So I would say that if you're not clear with your messaging, people will often associate that with your competency skill. And that will affect how your brand comes across because they will see you as less effective communicator. And that can affect how they see you in terms of your abilities.
Can we just explore that a little bit further? Because often this is something I presented with as an executive advisor, is when people say, but I can't distill it all to one message. I certainly can't distill it. I often say to people, right, what are your top 3 messages? And then what's your one key message? And often people say, no, you don't understand. There's 14 things I must communicate here. Yeah.
Yes. And Adrian, I think that I'm going to answer that really brilliant question with this very important point is understand your audience. I think this is exactly it, because you're asking for some top key information, and what someone wants to do is they want to communicate to you in their style, which is maybe 14 pages or whatever else they might have in place. So one of the key things I say to anyone before you go out and speak is please know who you're speaking to. if you're working with a group of people who are very analytical, like your technicians, your data analysts, or your architects, or someone that wants the minutiae of details, please go away and get, your graphs and Excel sheets, and make sure you package it so that that group sees you as a credible communicator. Now, if you're speaking to high level C-suite leaders, they don't have time for the minutiae. That's what they've hired you to do. That's your job. What they want, and this is often where I'm pulled in, is please can you let my people know I want it as a one-page, high-level, outcome-focused piece of information. I am not looking at the weeds and the details. And so it's helping people understand that really you want to think about who are you trying to influence? And can you, this is the crucial piece, adapt your style to step into their world? Because when you can do that, that's when information lands succinctly. And this includes, Adrian, understanding the organizational culture, because each organization operates differently, and also understanding country cultures. And by which I mean the US to Europe, to the Middle East, to Japan, to India, to the Far East. It's what are those cultures driven by? Now, some cultures are very driven by task and it's transactional and they want you super fast information top. Other cultures, and Japan being one of them, are more about relationship cultures. They're not going to sign on the dotted line till they built a strong enough relationship with you. And that is key to knowing how you can then influence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating for me, but even in very, very task-orientated cultures, the truth is the fact, it's taken a relationship to get in the room and even start doing business with that person. So even in, far left, that axis, even in task-orientated cultures like that, relationships really matter. And just from my perspective, I think many people see relationships or trusted relationships as a nice to have. I personally think trust is efficient. More gets done when it's efficient. So I wonder if we could dig a little bit deeper here and explore what are some of the techniques and tactics and different elements that you use, just a sprinkle of what you use to help your clients communicate effectively. Now, that could be a board meeting, that could be an investor relations, that could be some change management. And I know the breadth that you operate across there, Lisa.
Oh, thank you, Adrian. Yes, I mean, there are so many skills, as you can imagine. So I'm going to pick a couple that I think will really be the game changers. One of which is, first of all, I think I've alluded to this already, is please be clear in your messaging. So know why you're in that room. What is the purpose? And be succinct, particularly if you want to influence upwards, for the very reason we talked about. Time is an issue, and they want to ensure that they have value for time. The other thing that I hadn't talked about, which I think is really important, is stories. And I know some people think, oh, that's that fluffy bit. Actually, what has that got to do with business? But actually, we are wired as human beings to remember information through stories. In fact, we live our life through stories. From the moment we wake up from a dream, I mean, a dream's a story, isn't it? You don't communicate that in data necessarily. To the moment we, switch the telly on or read the papers or talk to our spouses or go into work and share about what happened on your day. We live in stories. So if you have to communicate information, use an appropriate story to land that piece of information, because that's what's going to help people remember. And then the third thing I would say is be aware of how you use your breath. Now, this is something most people sort of don't even think about, because we're breathing, aren't we? We wouldn't be alive if we weren't. But actually, the key thing is, what is your breath doing in any given moment in time? Now, I mentioned earlier that if you're in a fight or flight situation where you are triggered, the likelihood is your breath is going to move up into what I call the collarbone breathing. We've all been there. It's very fast, it moves very quickly, and you can suddenly feel your heart rate going up. Now, that's not the breath you want to use. to help your audience or the people around you come on a journey with you. So what you want to do is calm that parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest system. And how you do that is by breathing more deeply. Now, I'm not going to show you today how to do that because that's going to take a little more time. But just to give you the term diaphragmatic breath, which means the breath that sits below your diaphragm, which sits underneath your lungs. So really just feeling that breath that increases or releases when you breathe into your belly, and that breath that you use on the exhalation as your belly contracts. So if you've done any kind of singing, laughing, which I'm sure we all do at points, any kind of public speaking where you've been well trained, you would be introduced to this idea. That is fundamental because it calms your nervous system. It enables you then to feel more empowered. It slows your pace down, and it enables you to speak with a voice that has greater credibility. So that's the key thing. Now, the second thing that follows suit, which I think is fundamental, and most people are terrified of, is the word pause. Now, silence, pause. So it's that ability to stop speaking at points. Because if you don't stop, what people don't have the opportunity to do is digest what you've said.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, every person, I'm assuming, that's listening to this will be an expert in their field. Now, you know your field inside out, but we don't. So when you land a message, a thought, just give the audience a moment to hear you and reflect and digest. And that includes when you ask a question. Are there any questions? Most people are terrified of that silence. Maybe nobody understood them. Maybe, all that inner critic kicks in. But actually, people are reflecting to be able to respond. The other piece, and Adrian, you will be very familiar with this, is in a point of negotiation. That is worth its weight in gold. Those moments when you choose to be silent could be the game changer for that proposal, for that figure you put out for the pay rise, for that deal you're making. Saying too much often gets in the way. And then that piece of conflict management. And I talk about that because when we are triggered, for all of us, what we want to do immediately is to have that reactive response. And that could be over an email someone sends and pings into your box, or it could be a face-to-face. But taking that pause, taking that breath, calming that nervous system will enable you to respond in a way that you can go away feeling proud of, then react, and then wondering why you didn't get a good outcome. So those are the key things. But I also, and I know this is something you and I've often talked about, is some very practical things as well that people can do. And one of which is called the upspeak. Yes. And this one is it's a fun one, isn't it, Adrian? We've played with this before when we've worked together. And this is the unhelpful habit that many people have when they make a statement and they change it into a question. And I'm going to demonstrate it because it's going to be the fastest way that your audience will get this. So when, for instance, I'm saying my name, if I were to say it like this: good morning, my name is Lisa Orkerson. I am a voice and communication skills trainer. Let's just say I was asking for a pay rise and I said it like this: I would like 25% pay increase. I'm confident I deserve it. You're probably going to go, do you? Because every statement there ends with a question. Now listen to the difference if I land it. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa. I am a voice and communication skills trainer. I would like a 25% increase. And then I'm going to end off with, I'm confident I deserve it. And you can hear just by that drop
Yeah.
It sends a message of certainty
Yeah.
rather than a message of uncertainty or hesitancy.
Mm. I love that example. And obviously, on our impactful negotiation for women course, we obviously this came to light a huge amount, and we've discussed this. I think it's very powerful though how the keeping the statement a statement. There's two things that are really important. I'm here and there, Lisa, is keeping the statement a statement and making sure that downward inflection, but then the pause, because
Mm,
the double whammy is when somebody makes it a statement and then goes off on this huge justification of what they've just said, because you just sat the other side of the table thinking, confident, really? Really? So I think these, and again, I know we've worked on a lot of these things together and we've helped other people do this, and I know you consistently do that. It's just these small, powerful things, particularly when landing a message, are so important, again,
mm.
for leaders to a team, to a promotion, whatever it may be. And as I say, I love that term. You can't not communicate. So
No,
getting clear about what you want to communicate and then delivering it. I love those practical examples. Thank you.
you're very welcome. There's one more that I know most people will ask is, what do we do about those hesitancy, those uhs and ahs, which I know can
Pillars. Yeah, yeah.
frustrate people. I
Pillars.
just
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
add that last one. So, as human beings, we have a thing called thought. We vocalize our thoughts out loud
Mm-hmm.
with ums and ahs. Now, there's nothing wrong with it in itself. The odd one makes us human. We're not robots at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you're littering every pause with an and an ah, out loud, then what you can often communicate is that you're searching for that
Yes.
next word rather than landing it. So, this is when that pause comes in really powerfully. If you can just state what you want to state and wait, breathe,
Yeah.
and then come on to the next thought, your message is more likely to land with far more credibility than if you go into long sentences and avoid that.
Brilliant. Brilliant. No, that's a real skill because I'm a bit of a sort of communications geek. So I'm often listening to the radio or listening to podcasts or listening to the television and listening to even professionals. I'm in and are in. Now you can understand it when they're on site and there's something military or something happening there. But I think the important thing is there's again, and I asked you this question was how do you reduce your fillers? So how can you consciously reduce your fillers? How can you do that?
I would say just when you notice that you are going to do that habitual, and it's a habit, that's all it
Yeah.
is to literally stop and take that moment, pause, because your
Right.
brain's just catching up. That's all it's doing. And you've got into a habit of filling that catching up out loud. And we don't need to hear that. We can allow you to do that in the quiet of your own mind and
I
give
like
us that
that.
space. And that's a
Yeah.
generous act, isn't it? Because you're giving us the space, in fact, to catch up with
Right.
you before you take us into that next thought.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So have you got practical examples of the difference? And I know that there are many that you have about, and I've seen you work with people to then get a promotion or people to be more effective with their communication with their team, to recruit effectively for CEOs to be able to convince people for fundraising. There's a whole plethora of that you significantly impacted others' communication. I wonder if you could just share an example of that.
Course, yes. There's so many agents, and I can certainly pull in an example that I think will cover quite a bit of what I generally take a client through. And this is a client I worked with many years back, and I'm just so proud of her, which is why I want to share her story with you.
Sure, sure,
So she started off in a corporate company. I'm just going to call her Heidi just for confidential
sure.
reasons.
Great, yeah.
And Heidi was fast track. She was the rising star. Her president of the company wanted her to move into a directorial role. However, at that time, bright as she was, competent as she was, capable as she was, she would come into executive meetings, literally sit in the corner, the space where hardly anyone could see her, and hardly say a thing.
Okay.
Now, she felt she was listening very well, and she felt there was not very much she needed to contribute at the time. But when it came to this point of considering her for promotion, the ELT said, no, there's no way we could consider her because she's not showing up as a potential candidate. Now, this ties in a little bit, and I know we're not necessarily talking about this today, but ties in a little bit with the work I do on executive presence.
Yeah.
Now, I want to bring that up because often people think it's our competency that's enough to get us through the layers, particularly further up we go. And Dr. Sylvia Ann Hewlett, who's written a book on executive presence, talks about the further up you go, it is no longer judged, you're no longer judged on performance, but on your image.
Yeah.
Now that's quite a sort of maybe a shocking statement to many people. And it reminds me, Adrian, of something you shared with me years ago about the top jobs don't go to the most qualified, but the most connected.
Absolutely.
And there is something around this that I often have to educate the clients I work with, that your presence, your communication matters.
Yeah.
So with her, we started to talk about why she needed to hide, why she wasn't aware that her voice and her presence mattered. And over the 6 months period, which is the time we took to get her moving forward, I had to give her the skills on how to show up in that space using her physical presence, using her voice, which comes from that breath that we were talking about, and that voice that I mentioned earlier about, so that she came in with a sense of purpose. She wasn't there just to fill a quota, and that she could make a difference with her ideas and her expertise. Now, that then meant that she was going to be given the opportunity in this next role to be able to step up on a much larger stage and be the brand for them. Now, she was terrified of doing this, as you can imagine. And first of all, it was that big A4 sheet, that shakes when people are nervous. And then she was willing to go into cue cards and eventually not even have a card in her hand, because she was able to work with that sense of her own presence and her authenticity, but have the skill to take her to this whole next level.
Wonderful.
Now, by the time she was ready to go into that promotion interview, she was also at a space where she was willing and able to negotiate her worth.
Right.
So this communication came from how she showed up in a room, how she took her space on a larger stage, and also now how she would communicate her worth. And with this, not only did she get the promotion, she was then asked, and she volunteered herself, to be able to support and train, and in her organization, more women to do the same. I'm just incredibly proud of her.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So just to break that example down there, obviously working in partnership with her, you were able for her to increase her visibility, to own her space, find her voice, communicate that on the right platform, get promoted, then also then be appropriately rewarded for the value she adds, and then have a multiplying effect on other people in a similar situation. So there's about 6 wins going on there, if I can count. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, wonderful, Adrian. I think you've summed it up beautifully. You're
Amazing.
absolutely right.
Amazing. And the thing is, this happens all the time, doesn't it? And again, just to go back to this point, is that often many people assume competence is the element that's actually going to get you promoted. But the truth is, you're in a competitive field and everybody is perceived as competent. So what's the difference that makes the difference? Is that what I'm hearing here?
Absolutely. This is absolutely the case. And I think if you don't stand out where your communication and your effective communication skills matches your competence, often you will find yourself not being the person that's given the opportunities that others may inadvertently have.
Okay. So Lisa, thinking more broadly, we've touched on a number of business areas that actually, obviously, your work helps people with. Just think for the audience, with their wider lives, what can effective communication do to their wider lives and not just their business lives?
Well, absolutely. And I think one of the things, Adrian, that most of us at some point in our lives, personal lives, as well as other points in your life, is the misunderstanding that we may have with another person.
Mm,
And I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we might have had a falling out sometimes,
sure.
or where we've just felt that someone's triggered us the wrong way, or we haven't understood perhaps someone else's point of view. And I think when you're able to effectively communicate, you're able to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Sure.
And this is widespread, the uncomfortable conversations that could
Mm,
happen in your personal life, the uncomfortable conversations that could happen at work, whether it's someone coming back from a bereavement, whether it's you having to make someone
mm.
redundant, whether it's that underperformance that you have to deal with.
Sure, sure.
And what I often see is people either avoid it, park
Yeah,
it, or delegate it. And
great.
really, it's about how courageous can we be to
Mm,
step into that arena and have
yeah,
an empathetic, genuinely heart to heart conversation that
mm,
validates and hears someone else so that we can effectively
sure.
bring about a positive outcome. Or in your case, I know you often talk about a win win outcome.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. That's so true, though. And again, I think again, empathy, I think, can get a bad rap sometimes. It's seen as a soft option in many ways. Whereas I see the most effective leaders, they don't shirk the decision, if they've got to make people redundant. But you can do that in a human way. The
Mm,
decision won't change, but you can do that in a human, or what I'm hearing is you can do that in a human way. But
mm,
if you delegate it, or I suppose you could delegate it, you can be aggressive about it, or frankly, you can avoid it. None of which are really useful when it actually lands. I see the best leaders take that as an opportunity to actually enhance their relationship with somebody that they're making redundant, which is extraordinary. But they're courageous, brave enough to have honest conversations with people that are human. And I think it's a little bit for me about self-trust there, and
mm.
not just about building trusted relationships. It's two-way communication's vital.
Absolutely, Adrian. And I think this is where we see really powerful communication. And even if someone feels they are being made redundant, they feel that the other person did their best or cared for them in that process. And I'm sure you've heard of stories where someone's actually turned back and said, look, I know how uncomfortable it must be for you to tell
Sure.
this to me. And you get a very different response,
Mm,
as opposed to a real situation that I was, not involved in, but I saw, and this was about 15 years back in my career, where a very well known, I would say, television company decided to make half of their workforce redundant. And how they did this was via an email.
yeah,
Can
yeah,
you
yeah,
imagine? And these were people who had been with them for
yeah.
20 odd years of their lives. And I remember having to go in, I was there coaching many of these anchors to speak. But what I noticed is I was doing a lot of mop up because people felt
Yeah,
hugely
absolutely.
underappreciated. And all they wanted was to be validated, to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to have, as you've rightly said, that honest and respectful conversation.
I must just say this, that there's a leader I know, though, who unfortunately had to make about sort of 30 plus people redundant. Didn't delegate it.
Mm,
Was involved in every single exit conversation, and actually did everything he could to get those people their next jobs.
mm,
Now that's a huge multiplier effect, not just on those people, but on those families. And this isn't just this is a decent thing to do. And but what are you doing as well to go, if we could go full loop when you do that? Actually, in the payments industry, it's a small place, so is the world. And actually, your reputation, going back to image, your reputation does matter.
mm,
And whether you're recruiting, because you'll have to recruit again at some point when you're building a team or building that team. So I think communication is absolutely vital, and
mm.
in every way. Lisa, would you mind if this is normally the time when I try and summarize our conversation, but I've got many thoughts going through my head. So I wonder if I could just pick up on sort of three or four key elements to our conversation. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
So, firstly, thanks so much indeed for sharing your journey. I thought that was just brings the different pieces of the puzzle there to see. I'm always been impressed by how you show up, and I can see how those pieces have come together. I think the prominent ones for me is with effective communication, it's so two-sided in terms of active listening is as important as landing your message really effectively. I think the second point that really came for me is the context of your body language, your clarity of what the message you want to land before you ever speak, and the tone you actually say that with is as important, if not more important, than the content.
Mm.
I think the third part for me about some of the how is being clear about your message, making sure that you land the message, but at the same time, the power of a pause.
Mm.
The power of pause to allow the other person or the other people to allow that to go into their minds, to let it sit,
Mm.
and actually being really clear about less is more.
Mm.
I think the other component as well is look what you're missing out by not effectively communicating, just rushing from one thing to another. It could be promotions, as we've mentioned. It could be salary increases. It could be effective change management and actually communicating with your leaders as well as and your team as a leader. But I think the most prominent thing for me that I said always inspires the work we're doing is this is a learnable skill.
Mm.
This is something you at with time, with effort. And I love the fact if something's learnable, then what we can do with the right level of coaching, with the right level of methodology, then we can improve and we can get better at this, which can have a positive impact, not just on our careers, our impact in the industry, but our wider lives and our personal lives and our family. Is there anything else you would add to that, Lisa?
No, I think you summed it up beautifully, Adrian, and I completely agree with that summation. Thank you so much for pulling that together.
My pleasure, absolute pleasure with you. I get the easy bits. Yep. You're the expert and you've got all the knowledge. I just got to just try and pull those small bits together. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your work and also how people could contact you if people are interested in working with it. And just to say, from my perspective, Lisa has had a significant impact on how we work together and actually communicated. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, Adrian, first of all, I love what I do, and every person that comes to work with me will get all the skill set they need, as we've been talking about here, in relation to where it is they want to go on their career paths.
Sure.
So, if they want to reach out, you can either find me on my website, which is www.lisaaukerson, as it's spelt on the name, .com.
Yeah.
Or if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's another way you can do so. But I also want to share, which is something I haven't shared up till now, is that I am passionate about helping underrepresented groups as well. So
Yep.
whilst I do the day job of helping people, as I've talked about, anyone, any gender, in relation to their career progression, I also work a lot with women specifically for helping women move up that career ladder. And
Yep.
I have, over the last, particularly 5 years or so, been working a lot with Black and ethnic minority groups because we need to get that inclusivity up at senior level, despite all that's being said. Otherwise, at the moment, I'm a
Yep.
huge, passionate believer of inclusion and diversity. So just wanted to share that as well.
Absolutely, and I've always admired that work from you as well. And that's because it makes a positive difference and a productive
Mm.
difference. I think too many people think these are nice to haves. This actually makes a productive difference within an organization. Is that's your experience of
Absolutely.
excellent. Well, Lisa, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out today. I really, really do appreciate it. Please, for the audience, I hope today has been as informative for you as it has been for me. And if you please do reach out to Lisa, or if you have any other questions as well, please let us know in the comments below. Thank you much indeed again.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Lovely speaking with you.
Pleasure, Lisa. Thank you too.